there are games where a player piles up statistics, and then there's games where you can actually see what he's going to become. November 22nd, 2020 was one of those days for Brian Burns. And to understand why, you got to remember exactly what the Carolina Panthers looked like at this point in 2020. It wasn't just the first year of Matt Rule. It was the first year after the old Panthers had been dismantled. Ron Rivera was gone, Cam Newton's gone, Greg Olson's gone, Luke Kuechly retired at 28, Teddy Bridgewater was the new quarterback, Joe Brady's running the offense, Phil Snow is running the defense, and Carolina's trying to figure out which pieces were going to survive into whatever came next. So the Panthers started out 0-2. Then they ripped off 3 straight wins and briefly looked pretty interesting. Then the schedule and the flaws caught up with them. 5 straight losses followed. Carolina entered Week 11 at 3-7, and the previous Sunday had been the ugliest loss of the season so far. Tampa Bay came to Charlotte and beat them 46-23. The game was tied at 17 at halftime. Then the Panthers got run off their own field. Tampa finished with more than 500 yards, and the Carolina defense left that game embarrassed. Now Detroit's coming to town. And the Lions are only 4-5, but their situation was different. They still had something tangible to chase. Detroit beat Washington 30-27 the previous week, and a win in Charlotte will get the Lions back to 500 and keep them in the NFC playoff conversation. Green Bay was leading the North, but nobody behind the Packers had separated. For Detroit, 5-5 would mean December at least mattered. And that mattered to Matt Patricia, because everybody knew his job was becoming part of the story here. The Lions weren't arriving healthy. DeAndre Swift was out with a concussion. Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola both out. Matt Stafford was playing through an injured right thumb. Isn't he always playing through something injured, though? But that kept him from practice under center during the week. Carolina had its own problems. Christian McCaffrey's out again, this time with a shoulder injury. Russell Okung and John Miller were unavailable on the offensive line. Dante Jackson was doubtful and ultimately did not play. Then there's Teddy Bridgewater. Bridgewater injured his right knee against Tampa Bay. He practiced on a limited basis, warmed up before the Detroit game, and he wanted to play. But Rule eventually decided that even though Bridgewater probably could play, he wasn't going to let him. So less than 2 hours before kickoff, P.J. Walker had his first NFL start. And that changed the expectation for the game. Detroit was a 2.5-point favorite. Neither team generated any pass rush. Carolina had 11 sacks through 10 games. Detroit at 13. The Panthers were dead last in the NFL on third down defense, allowing conversions more than 55% of the time. That's awful. So if you're looking for an advantage, the obvious one was the one that Stafford had against Walker. Stafford started 158 games before this one. Walker had completed 3 passes. This looked like a game that Detroit should be able to grind out. But one player entering the day was already starting to strain against what the Carolina defense looked like statistically, and that's Brian Burns. Burns is 22 in his second NFL season. Carolina selected him with the 16th overall pick out of Florida State in 2019, after he produced 24 college sacks, 5th most in Seminoles history. And he immediately looked different from most edge rushers. Long frame, quick first step, loose hips, enough speed that sometimes tackles started retreating before he even committed to where he was going. And his rookie year was both promising and weird. He had 4.5 sacks in his first 6 games. Then he failed to completely block a punt against Houston. He got a partial punt block. He got frustrated and punched the turf. Injured his wrist, had a procedure, and spent a lot of the season trying to play with a giant protective club on his hand. But he still finished with 7.5 sacks, and that's the second most by a Panthers rookie. By 2020, Snow's asking more of him. Burns wasn't just a skinny speed rusher anymore. He's learning to play the run, learning hand placement, and learning how to set up blockers instead of simply trying to beat them to a spot. Entering the Detroit game, Burns led Carolina with 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 25 pressures. And those 25 pressures were a frustrating number. The sacks weren't matching how often Burns was affecting quarterbacks. 3 days before the game, Phil Snow told him a 3-sack game was coming. Burns agreed. He said getting close without finishing was starting to annoy him. There was also something unusual happening around him. Carolina had just become the first team in the common draft era, going back to 1967, to spend every one of its draft picks on defense. Derek Brown, Yetter Gross-Matos, Jeremy Chin, former defensive players came after them. The Panthers said they didn't plan it that way. The board just kept falling on the defensive side. So in 2020, Burns wasn't just being developed as an individual pass rusher. Carolina's essentially trying to grow the entire defense all at once. On November 22nd, for one day, you could see it. You could see what they're trying to build. Carolina got the ball first and punted. Then, P.J. Walker started to settle in. Starting from Carolina's 5-yard line, Walker led a 95-yard drive. He hit DJ Moore deep for 52 yards, then Carolina worked its way towards the goal line. Mike Davis finished it with a 1-yard plunge. Panthers 7-0. For a few minutes, looks like it's going to be the P.J. Walker episode, but it's not. Detroit's next possession ended in disaster when center Frank Ragnow's snap went loose and Marcus Haynes recovered it. Carolina had the ball at the Detroit 22, and Walker gave it right back. On third and goal, early in the second quarter, he tried to squeeze a pass toward DJ Moore. Amani Oruwari intercepted it in the end zone. Normally, that's where you expect the veteran cornerback on the other side to punish the mistake. I said cornerback. I meant quarterback. Stafford couldn't punish it, though. The Lions kept running into third downs, and Carolina kept getting off the field. Hi, Terrell Horn. How you doing? Burns wasn't only rushing. On one second quarter play, he dropped underneath, got into the passing lane on a Stafford throw towards Kerryon Johnson. That's part of what Snow was beginning to discover. If Burns could line up with his hand down, stand up outside, drop, or rush, the offense had to identify him before it could worry about blocking him as he defending the run of the pass. At halftime, Carolina led 7-0. And Walker threw an interception in scoring territory. The Panthers left points on the field, but Detroit, they only had 89 yards. Then Carolina opened the third quarter by forcing another 3-and-out. On third down, Burns got pressure on Stafford and forced an incompletion towards Marvin Jones. Walker answered with Carolina's best clean drive of the second half. Robbie Anderson for 18, DJ Moore for 20. Then on 3rd and 3 from Detroit 17, Walker found Curtis Samuel for his first NFL touchdown pass, 14-0. Now Detroit needs to throw. Now Burns could start hunting. The Lions appeared to answer immediately with a trick play. Stafford wound up finding Marvin Jones for what looked like a 51-yard touchdown, but they were flagged for illegal formation, so it got called back, no play. Now in the next sequence, Burns and F.A. Obata collapsed Stafford for a shared sack. That was the first half sack on Burns' official line. Carolina eventually got the ball back. Joey Slye drilled a 56-yard field goal, and it was 17-0 entering the fourth. Detroit finally moved into legitimate scoring range late in the third. Stafford found T.J. Hawkinson for 35 yards. The Lions reached the Carolina 25, but they never got any closer. On second down, Burns and Zach Kerr converged on Stafford for another 8-yard loss. Another half sack for Burns. Matt Prater came out for a 51-yard field goal, wide left. That 0 stayed up there on the board. Then Carolina gave Detroit another chance. Walker drove the Panthers into the red zone and threw his second interception of the afternoon. This one to Desmond Trufant. Again, a veteran quarterback gets the football after a young quarterback made a mistake. And again, Carolina's defense erased it. Detroit moved to its 32. Then Burns came screaming through the line, untouched. Stafford had no chance. Burns buried him for 7 yards, and that one belonged 100% to Burns. And apparently it was Burns' favorite sack of the day because, as he said afterward, it came when he was tired as hell. Detroit simply failed to block him. Burns joked he usually didn't get freebies, and on the next play, Zach Kerr and Yetur Gross-Matos got Stafford again. Detroit turned it over on downs. Sly added a 37-yarder, 20-0, and that was it. Carolina 20, Detroit 0. The Panthers held the Lions to 185 total yards, 40 rushing yards, 10 first downs. Detroit went 3 for 14 on third. Carolina forced 6 punts after forcing only 2 punts total over its prior 4 games. Stafford completed 18 of 33 for 178 yards. The Panthers sacked him 5 times and hit him 11. Brian Burns officially finished with 5 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 hits, and 1 pass defended. It was the first multi-sack game of his NFL career. And this was Carolina's first shutout since their 15-1 season in 2015. And it came just a week after giving up 46 points. So the locker room noticed the difference immediately. After the Tampa loss, Shaq Thompson had let the defense hear about it. This time, guys were talking about all the details they'd emphasized all week. And Burns put it simply, last week we stunk up the field. He said the Tampa game had forced them to notice the little things they'd been missing. Against Detroit, they fixed enough. And Burns explained what Snow had done with him. Carolina moved him around, stood him up, and disguised where the pressure's coming from. They had no idea where I was coming from, Burns later said, and that's basically Burns' thesis statement. Rule pointed out the sacks weren't just Burns winning races off the edge. Carolina's secondary covered well enough to make Stafford hold the football. The Panthers showed pressure and backed out of it. They created one-on-one matchups for Burns and let him solve them. Trey Boston called it a brand win, and Burns mostly talked about how much fun the defense was having. 3 days later, the NFL named him the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. Detroit's reaction was different. Stafford didn't blame his thumb. He said that wasn't the problem. He said it's not fun to be part of a game when we don't score. The Lions arrived in Charlotte thinking a win could put them at 5-5. Instead, they're 4-6 with Houston coming to Detroit just 4 days later for Thanksgiving. Houston beat them 41-25. So 2 days later, the Lions fired Matt Patricia and general manager Bob Quinn. Detroit did win Darrell Bevell's first game as interim coach against Chicago, but only once. The Lions lost 4 of their last 5, finished 5-11. Carolina was also 5-11. So after beating Detroit, the Panthers lost by 1 to the Vikings, lost to Denver, lost to Green Bay, beat Washington, then finished with a 33-7 loss to the Saints. So this wasn't the start of a playoff run, but it was somewhat useful. It was evidence. Evidence that some of the young defensive pieces were real. Burns finished 2020 with 9 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. He had 9 more sacks in 21 and made his first Pro Bowl. Then came 2022, 12.5 sacks, another Pro Bowl, and the point where the rest of the league clearly started to understand what Carolina had. The Rams reportedly offered Carolina 2 first-round picks and a second-rounder for Burns at the 2022 trade deadline. The Panthers said no. They considered Burns part of the foundation. But they never got their long-term contract done. Burns had 8 sacks in 23, reached the end of his rookie deal, received the franchise tag, and got traded to the New York Giants in March of 24. Carolina got a second-round pick, moved up in the 5th round, and received another 5th rounder the following year. New York immediately gave Burns 5 years, worth up to $150 million, and his first Giant season brought him 8.5 sacks. Then in 25, Burns had the best sack total of his career, 16.5. He made another Pro Bowl and was named second-team All-Pro. Through 7 NFL seasons, Burns has 71 sacks, and 46 of those came as a Carolina Panther. And the Spider-Man thing? That never went away either. So Burns had been doing Spider-Man sack poses since Florida State. He wore Spider-Man socks on draft night. When Carolina drafted him, he threw the web shooter pose on stage. Pew! He brought it into the NFL and kept changing the poses after sacks, which means this entire career has an oddly consistent visual language. Quarterback goes down, Brian Burns crouches somewhere nearby and starts shooting webs. So he loved Spider-Man as a kid, did the celebration once in college, and then it just became part of him. Spider-Burns stuck. But go back to November 22nd, 2020, and forget what came afterward. Burns is 22. He hadn't yet made a Pro Bowl. He's never had a multi-sack NFL game. Carolina's 3-7. They've lost 5 in a row. The starting QB's out. Their best offensive player's out. And they just gave up 46 points. Phil Snow spends the week telling Brian Burns, eventually, all those pressures are going to turn into sacks. Then Detroit comes to Charlotte. Burns gets Stafford once, half of another, and then another half. Carolina gives up 0 points. And for the first time, the production catches up to what everybody around him had already been seeing. Okay, the next episode takes us back to Houston, July 8th, 2009. Astro 76's Wandy Rodriguez, and this one is about as clean a pitching line gets. 9 innings, 5 hits, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, no runs. Complete game shutout. Remember those? Complete game shutout of the Pittsburgh Pirates that pulled the Astros within 1 game of 500. And we'll get to Wandy next. But for now, that's it. Thanks for stopping by, watching Panther 10. Hope to see you next time. Like and subscribe. And everybody, have a great day. One game of 500. We'll get to Wandy next. But for now, that's it. Thanks for stopping by, watching Panther 10. Hope to see you next time. Like and subscribe. And everybody,